Some people move through the world like winter, not cruel, not careless, just cold in the way that very controlled things are cold, precise, contained. Beautiful, maybe, from a distance, but not the kind of beautiful you can touch. Bennett was winter. His mansion had 14 rooms, marble floors that had never been scuffed, windows tall enough to make a man feel small inside his own home, art on the walls that cost more than most people make in a lifetime, chosen not because it moved him, but because it was correct. The right pieces, the right address, the right life. From the outside, it looked complete. From the inside, it echoed. He had built an empire by 38, negotiated deals that moved markets, sat across tables from men who could buy cities and won. He understood numbers. He understood leverage. He understood the architecture of power better than most people understand their own names. But feelings? Bennett had no blueprint for that. No strategy, no exit clause. So he kept people at a careful distance and called it discipline. Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching this story. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories. His house reflected him back, every surface clean, every room perfectly arranged, every corner exactly as he'd left it. There was no mess. There was no warmth. There was just order and the particular silence that follows a man who has spent years making sure nothing unexpected gets close. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, he heard a laugh. It came from the kitchen, soft, unguarded, the kind of laugh that doesn't know it's being heard. And it moved through that cold. A quiet mansion like the first light through curtains that have been closed too long. He didn't see her. Not yet. He just stood in the hallway, this man who had never once been caught off guard in a boardroom, completely still. I did not know, he thought, that a laugh could sound like that. He didn't go in. He just listened. For 10 seconds that somehow felt like something. Then his phone rang. His sister's name lit up the screen. The wedding was in 3 weeks, and he had no one to bring. The Bennett family Sunday lunch looked like a painting. Pale sunlight caught the crystal glasses and threw small rainbows across the white tablecloth. Silver cutlery, fresh flowers in the center. His mother at the head of the table, back straight, smile soft, the way she had always sat. Like grace was something she had practiced until it became her. Oh, it should have felt warm. For Bennett, it felt like a performance he had a supporting role in. His sister Clara spoke first. She always spoke first. You know, she said, reaching for her wine glass without looking up. The last time you came to an event alone, the Hargrove woman thought you were security. His mother laughed. That quiet, delighted laugh she reserved for moments when someone said what she was already thinking. Bennett set down his fork. I was standing near the door. You were standing near the door with that face, Clara said. Bennett, you looked like a man attending his own tax audit. He said nothing. He reached for his water instead. That was the thing about his family. They loved him loudly, in ways that required him to be a little vulnerable, and he had never quite figured out how to meet them there. His mother set her glass down gently. The wedding is in 3 weeks. You should bring someone, not for appearances. She paused. For you. The table went quiet in the specific way it does when a truth has just been placed between people who all recognize it. Bennett looked at his plate. He thought about the women in his circle. Polished, appropriate, perfectly selected. He had their numbers. He had taken 3 of them to events in the last 2 years. They had been fine, correct, forgettable. He tried to imagine bringing any of them to Clara's wedding, and the image wouldn't form. Instead, without choosing it, without meaning to, his mind went somewhere else entirely. A kitchen, a Tuesday morning, an ordinary laugh that had moved through his chest like something he didn't have a word for. He picked up his fork. "I'll sort it," he said. Clara looked at him the way sisters look at brothers who are lying to themselves. She said nothing, but she smiled. The rain had started somewhere around 6. By the time Bennett came through the front door, it was pressing flat against every window in the house. Soft and steady, the kind of rain that doesn't demand attention. It just fills the silence until the silence feels inhabited. He set his keys on the entrance table, loosened his tie, stood for a moment in the hallway the way a man stands when he has something on his mind that he hasn't yet decided what to do with. Then he walked toward the kitchen. He told himself it was for water. The kitchen was warm in a way the rest of the house rarely was. Something had been cooking earlier. Lemon, something herbed, the kind of smell that makes a large, empty space feel briefly like a home. Kiara was at the counter, her back to him, working through the last of the evening dishes. The quiet tap of plates, the soft fold of a cloth. He stood in the doorway. He did not speak immediately. He watched her hands, the easy, unhurried way they moved, and felt something tighten in his chest that he immediately chose not to examine. "Kiara." She turned, not startled, not rushed, just turned, the way people turn when they already feel comfortable in a space. "Mr. Bennett." He cleared his throat, crossed his arms, uncrossed them. "I need to ask you something. It's a professional matter, a temporary arrangement with clear parameters." She set the cloth down slowly. He kept going. Terms, compensation adjustment, dates, the wedding venue, his sister, the optics, the expectation of discretion. All of it delivered in the measured. A contractual tone he used in boardrooms when he needed to project control. When he finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Kiara looked at him for a long moment, not uncomfortable, not thrown. Somewhere at the edge of her expression, faint, careful, was amusement. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "that may be the strangest promotion anyone has ever offered me." He almost said something. He stopped. Because here was the thing about Kiara that he had never once been able to fully explain, even to himself. She did not shrink around him. Most people did. Assistants, colleagues, people who had known him for years. Something in his presence made people smaller, quieter, more careful. Not her. She simply stood in her own space and looked at him like he was a person. Like that was enough. "I'll think about it," she said, and turned back to the counter. He stood there for one more second than was necessary. Then he walked out. He had been ready for 40 minutes. That was the first sign that something was different. Bennett, who was never early to anything that didn't have a financial consequence, standing at the bottom of his own staircase in a tailored suit, checking nothing, going nowhere, simply waiting. He told himself it was impatience. The morning light came through the tall windows at a low angle, the kind of light that belongs only to certain hours, pale gold, unhurried, falling across the marble floor in long, quiet strips. The house held a stillness that felt different from its usual silence, less empty, like something was about to happen that the room already knew about. He heard her door first, then footsteps, soft, deliberate, the sound of someone moving carefully in something unfamiliar. And then Kiara appeared at the top of the staircase. He would struggle later to describe exactly what he saw, not because there was nothing to describe, because language, his language, the precise and controlled language of a man who had negotiated with some of the sharpest minds in the world, simply left him. She wasn't dressed extravagantly. The fabric was simple, the color quiet, but something in the way it moved, the way she carried herself down each step with that particular stillness she always had, it rearranged the room around her without asking permission. Even the staircase seemed to pause beneath her. He did not move. He had spent years acquiring expensive things, art, architecture, objects chosen by people who understood beauty professionally. Not one of them had ever done this, reached into his chest without touching him and taken the words clean out. She reached the bottom step and looked at him. "Is something wrong?" she asked. He realized he had been staring. "No," he said. One word. That was all he managed. Kiara held his gaze for just a moment. Steady, unreadable, that quiet self-possession she wore like a second skin. Then she looked toward the door. "We should go," she said. "We don't want to be late." He nodded and followed her out, like it was the most natural thing he had ever done. The moment they stepped through the garden gates, something shifted. It was subtle at first, the way a room changes when a door opens and everyone feels the air move before they turn to look. Conversations didn't stop. They just slowed. Eyes moved. Heads turned by degrees, the way people do when they are trying not to appear as interested as they are. The wedding was everything Clara had planned it to be. White chairs in long rows beneath open sky. Flowers climbing every arch and post, ivory and blush, trembling faintly in the warm afternoon air. Gold light everywhere. The kind of late afternoon gold that makes ordinary things look briefly consecrated. And into all of that, Bennett and the woman beside him. He kept his hand at the small of her back, lightly, barely there, the kind of contact that is technically guidance and nothing more. He told himself that was all it was. His sister saw them from across the garden. He watched her face move through surprise, delight, and satisfaction in approximately 2 seconds. Then she covered it quickly with the composed smile of someone who knew better than to make a scene before the ceremony. His mother simply looked. Her eyes moved from Kiara to Bennett and back again, reading something between them that Bennett himself had not yet found the vocabulary for. Then she smiled. Not the polite smile she offered guests, but the private one. The one she kept for moments that mattered. He steered Kiara forward, and then he noticed the man near the floral arch. Dark suit, easy smile, eyes that had found Kiara and decided to stay there. He leaned slightly toward his companion and said something low. His companion glanced over and nodded. Bennett felt it before he understood it. Something tightened across his shoulders. His hand at her back pressed, just fractionally, firmer. He did not examine why. Strange? He would think later. Strange how quickly a borrowed role began to feel territorial. They were not together. He had no claim. And yet something ancient and unreasonable inside him had already disagreed. He had not planned to dance. That was the honest truth of it. Bennett had attended 40-something formal events in his adult life and had navigated every single one of them without once stepping onto a dance floor. It was not something he advertised. It was simply something he avoided, the way a man quietly avoids anything that requires him to be unguarded in public. But Clara had asked, and Clara was the bride. And there are very few arguments available to a brother on his sister's wedding day. So there he was. The music was slow, the kind of slow that has no urgency, no escape route, just a melody that asks you to stay present and means it. Candlelight everywhere, soft and unsteady, turning the whole room amber. The crowd blurred at the edges, and in the center of all of it, Bennett stood with his hand at Kiara's waist like a man holding something he wasn't entirely sure he was allowed to hold. He was stiff. He knew he was stiff. She felt it immediately. Without a word, without making it a moment, she adjusted, shifted her weight slightly, softened the frame between them, moved in a way that gave him somewhere to follow instead of somewhere to perform. And something in him, slowly, almost reluctantly, followed. Her hand was in his. That was the simple fact of it. Fingers resting against his palm the way they had no reason to feel as natural as they did. That was what unsettled him. Not the closeness, not the music, not the eyes of his family watching from the edge of the room with expressions he refused to read directly. It was how easily it fit. Her fingers in his felt dangerous for exactly that reason. Not because they were unfamiliar, but because they weren't. Because his hand seemed to have been expecting them without consulting him first. He looked down at her. She looked up. One beat of eye contact that lasted slightly longer than it should have. Neither of them looked away first. His breathing changed, quietly, almost imperceptibly, but it changed. And somewhere at a table near the back, his mother set down her wine glass and folded her hands in her lap with the patient satisfaction of a woman who had been waiting a very long time for her son to feel something he couldn't talk himself out of. He got home at 11. Poured a glass of water he didn't drink. Loosened his tie for the second time that evening, as though the first hadn't taken. Stood at the window and looked out at the city, all those lights. All that distance, the skyline doing what it always did, which was look impressive and mean nothing. He was tired. He did not sleep. He lay in the dark of his bedroom with his hands behind his head and stared at the ceiling the way a man stares when his mind refuses to go quiet. The ceiling offered nothing useful. His mind didn't care. It kept returning, not to anything dramatic, not to a single moment he could point to and say, "There, that is the problem." It returned to small things. The way she had laughed at something his aunt said, genuinely, without checking first whether it was appropriate to laugh, and the particular warmth of her voice when she spoke to his mother. The faint trace of her perfume that had somehow followed him home and was now, unreasonably, in a room she had never entered. He told himself he was overstimulated. It had been a long day. This was nothing. He almost believed it. By 6 a.m, he gave up on sleep entirely, dressed, and went downstairs. Kiara was already in the kitchen. She looked up when he entered, nodded once, returned to what she was doing. He opened the refrigerator, closed it, opened a cabinet, closed that too. Then he said, and he would later be privately embarrassed by this, "Looks like it might rain today." Kiara paused. She turned slowly and looked at him with the measured expression of a woman processing something she found quietly extraordinary. He had a weather application on 3 separate devices. She had heard him dismiss small talk at dinner parties as a symptom of intellectual surrender. "Does it?" she said. Not a question, just 2 words carrying everything. He cleared his throat, looked at the window. The sky was entirely clear. "Possibly," he said. Kiara turned back to the counter and said nothing more, but her shoulders moved, just slightly, in a way that was unmistakably, carefully, a suppressed smile. It happened in small moments. Not in grand gestures, not in declarations. In the quiet, unremarkable spaces between one part of the day and the next. The kind of moments that don't announce themselves as important until much later, when you look back and realize that's exactly where everything changed. It started with coffee. He had come downstairs early again, a habit now, though he hadn't admitted it was a habit. Kiara was at the counter, reaching across for the sugar, and her elbow caught his cup cleanly. Coffee across the marble, across his shirt, cold, immediate. She froze. He looked down, and then, from somewhere he couldn't identify, from some place in him that hadn't been accessed in a very long time, he laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not a controlled, socially appropriate acknowledgement that something mildly amusing had occurred. A real one. Sudden and unguarded, the kind that arrives before you can decide whether to allow it. Kiara stared at him. He stopped, cleared his throat, looked back down at his shirt, but the laugh had already happened, and something in the room had already shifted because of it. 3 days later, the storm came. It arrived in the early evening, the serious kind, low sky, rain against every window at once, the city outside reduced to blurred light and sound. The power went at 7:30. The house dropped into darkness so complete it felt almost deliberate. Bennett found candles. Kiara found blankets. They ended up at the kitchen table across from each other with 2 cups of tea between them, the candlelight moving softly with the draft, the rain pressing steadily against the glass. No agenda, no performance, no version of themselves they were maintaining for anyone. He told her about his father, briefly, carefully, the way men tell things they have not told before. She listened without rushing him toward a resolution. She told him about leaving home at 19, 1 bag. No plan, just the decision that staying would cost her more than going. He said nothing for a moment after that. Then, that took courage. She looked at the candle. It took desperation. I dressed it up later. The rain continued. Neither of them moved to leave. Wealth had always filled his rooms, furniture, art, the correct objects in the correct places. That night, for the first time, honesty did. And it turned out honesty took up more space and left less room for the cold. His name was Callum Reed, architect. Charming in the easy, practiced way of men who have always known they were charming. He arrived at the mansion on a Thursday morning for a consultation about the East Wing renovation, punctual, well-dressed, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who moved comfortably through expensive rooms. Bennett had worked with him twice before. He was good at his job, professional, perfectly agreeable. By 11:15, Bennett had decided he didn't particularly like him. It happened in the hallway. Kiara had come through carrying a tray, unhurried, composed, completely unaware that anything was about to shift. Callum turned when he heard her, and his attention, immediate, unguarded, the kind a man doesn't fully bother to conceal when he thinks no one relevant is watching, settled on her with considerable interest. "I don't think we've met," he said. Warm, deliberate. Kiara offered a polite smile, said her name, kept moving. Callum watched her go a beat longer than necessary, then turned back to Bennett with an appreciative expression that was probably meant to read as casual. It did not land as casual. Something moved through Bennett's chest, quiet, swift, and entirely unwelcome. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a cold, clear current of something that had no professional justification and arrived anyway, fully formed, as though it had simply been waiting for exactly this moment to introduce itself. He looked back at the renovation plans spread across the table. "Kiara has worked with me this afternoon," he said. "Even, measured, not unkind, but unmistakable." Callum nodded and moved on without comment, the way people move on when a boundary has been drawn so cleanly there is nothing to push against. Later, after the meeting, after the handshake at the door, after the car disappeared down the drive, Bennett sat at his desk and thought about what he had done. He had not been harsh. He had not been unreasonable. He had been territorial. Over someone who did not belong to him. Over an arrangement that had an end date. Over a woman who had never once asked him to protect her and was frankly more capable of managing herself than most people he employed. The protectiveness had arrived before the logic, before the restraint, before he had any say in the matter at all. That, more than anything, was what unsettled him. Not that he had felt it, but how quickly. His mother arrived on a Saturday with no prior warning and garden gloves in her handbag. That was how Bennett knew it was serious. She kissed his cheek at the door, declined tea, and walked directly through the house and out into the garden with the purposeful stride of a woman who had already decided what she was going to say and was simply choosing her setting. He followed. The roses were in full argument with the season, overgrown, are reaching past their frames, beautiful in the chaotic way of things that have been left to grow without direction. His mother pulled on her gloves, picked up the shears from the low bench near the wall, and began cutting without preamble. Bennett stood beside her. "You're going to lose the whole branch if you let it go much longer," she said. She was talking about the roses. She was not talking about the roses. He watched her work. Clean cuts, deliberate, removing what had grown past its purpose to make room for what was still becoming. "She's not just anyone," his mother said, quietly, without looking up. Bennett said nothing. "I've watched you with people your entire life." She trimmed another stem, set it aside. "You manage them. You're courteous. You're appropriate. You keep them exactly where you put them." She paused. You don't manage her." Still nothing from him. "That terrifies you," she said. "I know. Everything you can't control terrifies you." She finally looked at him, not with pressure, not with urgency, but with the particular patience of a woman who loves someone enough to tell them the truth without needing them to receive it immediately. "But Bennett, the things worth having have never once fit neatly inside your plans." She handed him the shears. He took them, and they worked side by side in the afternoon quiet, cutting back what no longer served, making space in the soil for something new, while somewhere inside the house, completely unaware that she was being discussed, Kiara moved through her afternoon, present, close, and closer than she knew. The garden was doing what gardens do in spring, quietly insisting on life, roses opening at their own pace, indifferent to everything happening between the two people standing among them. Wind moving through the upper branches in long, slow exhales. The kind of afternoon that holds its light carefully, as though it understands something is about to happen that deserves to be seen clearly. Kiara had come out to cut flowers for the table. Bennett had followed. He didn't announce it, didn't prepare a version of himself. He simply walked out through the glass doors and crossed the garden toward her, and something in the way he moved, without his usual precision, without the contained, purposeful stride of a man executing a plan, told her immediately that this was different. She kept her hands on the roses. He stopped a few feet away. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people standing at the edge of something they have both been aware of for longer than either has been willing to say. Then his hand moved. Slowly, deliberately. His fingers found hers against the stems, not taking, not gripping, just resting there, present, asking nothing, offering everything. She did not pull away. He exhaled. "I know what this looks like from the outside," he said. His voice was quiet, entirely unperformed. "I know the distance between where you stand and where I stand. I'm not asking you to pretend it isn't there." He paused. "I'm asking you to let me stand on your side of it." She looked at him, not with the careful, measured composure she usually kept between them, but with something underneath that. Something that had been there for a long time, held back by every reasonable, a self-protective instinct a woman develops when she has learned that hope is expensive. "This isn't equal," she said. "You know that?" "I know," he said. "I'm not offering equal. I'm offering real." She searched his face for the performance, for the strategy, for the version of Bennett who negotiated outcomes and managed people and kept himself at a clean, safe distance from anything that could cost him. She didn't find it. What she found instead was a man standing in a garden with roses at his back and his hands, those steady, composed boardroom hands, reaching toward her face with a vulnerability so complete it looked almost like pain. He had signed contracts worth nations, he would think later, with more composure than this. His fingers touched her jaw. She let them. And then, slowly, on with all the weight of everything that had built between them across every quiet morning and candlelit evening and unfinished sentence, he closed the distance. The kiss was not dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was tender and unhurried and entirely honest. The kind of kiss that doesn't need to prove anything because it already knows what it is. The roses moved in the wind. The light held. The garden, patient as it had always been, simply witnessed. When they finally separated, she did not step back. She stayed exactly where she was, and Bennett understood, with a clarity that required no words and no strategy and no plan, that winter had finally, irrevocably ended. Everything shifted, and yet somehow the most important things stayed exactly the same. He still made terrible coffee. That remained a fixed and reliable truth in a season of change. Every morning without exception, Bennett, a man who had correctly timed the collapse of 3 separate market cycles, produced something from his expensive Italian machine that tasted aggressively of disappointment. Chiara had stopped trying to explain where he went wrong. She simply waited until he turned away and quietly made a second pot. He pretended not to notice. She pretended not to replace it. It was the kind of small private joke that belongs exclusively to 2 people who have stopped performing for each other. The rest of the world took slightly longer to adjust. The first business dinner she attended beside him, she wore deep green and said very little and listened with the quality of attention that makes people feel, inexplicably, that they have been genuinely understood. By the end of the evening, 2 of his longest associates had sought her out specifically. One of them told Bennett afterward, with the sincere bewilderment of a man receiving unexpected news, that she was remarkable. Bennett said, "I know," as though he had always known, as though it had never required a wedding and a kitchen and a storm and a garden to teach it to him. His mother hosted Sunday lunch the following week and set Chiara's place at the table without comment or ceremony, simply there, between Bennett and Clara, as though it had always been that way, as though the chair had been waiting. Clara caught Kiara's eye across the table and smiled with the triumphant warmth of a sister who had been right and was choosing generously not to say so directly. And at one of those dinners, late in the evening, the table cleared, conversation low and unhurried, Bennett watched a man across the room notice Kiara for the second time in 10 minutes. His hand moved, quietly, naturally, to the back of her chair. Not a claim, not a performance, just presence. She glanced at him sideways. He looked back. Something passed between them, fond, easy, entirely wordless. The private language of two people who have found each other past all the walls and distances and reasonable objections. Then she reached over, without looking, and replaced his coffee with hers. He drank it, said nothing, and for the first time in longer than he could accurately measure, Bennett sat in a room full of people and felt, quietly, completely, without effort or strategy, entirely at home. He had planned it carefully. That's not the way he planned acquisitions, not with contingencies and exit strategies and 3 prepared responses for every possible outcome. He had planned it the way a man plans something when he finally understands that control was never the point. Simply and honestly, with nothing held in reserve, the restaurant was quiet. Not empty, just the particular quietness of a room that has been chosen for its ability to hold a moment without interrupting it. Candlelight on white linen, winter pressing softly against the tall windows outside, the city beyond them blurred and distant and entirely irrelevant to what was happening at this table. Kiara had dressed simply. She always did. And she always managed, without apparent effort, to make simple feel like the most considered choice in any room. They had finished dinner, and the plates had been cleared. The wine was low. Bennett set down his glass. He looked at her, directly, openly, with none of the careful management he had once kept permanently in place between himself and everything that mattered. And he said, "Do you remember what I called it when I asked you to come with me to Clara's wedding?" She tilted her head slightly. A professional arrangement with clear parameters. Yes. The edge of his mouth moved. I was very precise. You were terrified, she said, gently, accurately. I was terrified, he agreed. He reached into his jacket, set the box on the table between them, small, dark, unannounced by anything except the way his hands moved placing it there. Not quite steady, not performing steadiness. One lie, he said quietly, brought me the only truth I have ever trusted. The candle moved between them. Kiara looked at the box, then at him. At the man who had once stood in a hallway listening to a laugh through a closed door and felt something shift in a chest that had been closed for years. At the man who had talked about whether to have a reason to stay in the same room. Who had stood in a garden with unsteady hands and told her the plain truth without strategy or protection. She did not cry first. She looked at him with clear eyes and the full grounded strength of a woman who had made every important decision in her life from a place of honesty rather than hope. And she reached across the table and opened the box herself. Yes, she said, not overwhelmed, not swept away. Certain. The way she had always been certain, even when he hadn't been. And the way she had stood her ground in every room and held her own in every silence and never once asked him to be more than he was. Only waited, patiently, while he became it. He took the ring out with those same unsteady hands and placed it on her finger like a man keeping the most important promise he had ever made. Outside, winter pressed quietly against the glass. Inside, it had no place left to live. Spring came back to the garden like it always does, quietly, without announcement. Just one morning the roses were tight and closed, and the next something had opened, pink at the edges, reaching toward light with the particular confidence of things that have never once doubted they belong in the world. Bennett stood at the kitchen window with his coffee. It was still terrible. Some things, Kiara had decided long ago, were simply part of him, and she had stopped trying to improve what she had learned to love instead. Their daughter was in the garden, 3 years old and entirely fearless, moving through the rose beds in her small yellow boots with the focused, unhurried determination of someone conducting very important personal research. She stopped at a flower, considered it, reached out one careful finger and touched a petal with a gentleness so instinctive it could only have been inherited. Bennett watched her from the window. He thought about the man he had been in this house before all of this, the marble floors and the correct art, and the silence he had mistaken for years for peace, the rooms that held furniture but not memory, the version of himself that had moved through the world like winter, contained, precise, and quietly, privately, entirely alone. He thought about a Tuesday morning, a laugh through a door he hadn't yet opened. Kiara came to stand beside him, her shoulder against his, her hands wrapped around her own cup. She looked out at their daughter, who had now sat down directly in the grass with the calm authority of someone who has decided this is where she lives. Neither of them spoke for a moment. They didn't need to. This was the language they had built between them. The comfortable, unguarded silence of two people who had stopped performing and started simply being. Together. Present. Real. Once, this house had held polished silence like a museum protecting emptiness. Now laughter lived in the walls. Small feet crossed marble like music, and every spring morning, somewhere near the kitchen, Kiara still laughed, unself-conscious, unguarded, the same laugh that had moved through cold corridors years ago and found a man standing in a hallway, completely still, feeling something he didn't yet have a word for. He had the word now. He had everything now. Winter had not disappeared. It never fully does. But it had learned, slowly and permanently, where it was no longer welcome. And in its place, unhurried, unshakable, rooted like the roses in the garden outside, something warm had grown. Something that, this time, intended to stay.